Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Special Guest Saturdays. With me, I have Morgan Race. How are you doing? Well, that's just grand. I can tell this is going to be quite a thrilling interview today. He's just taking his time there. I think he's musing over how he feels. I must say, it's a nice outfit you've got on today. The hat really does it. Really completes the whole look. I do like it. Just give him a bit more time there to. Do you remember the question? Oh, hang on a second. We have another visitor.
Thought I'd pop him down there.
There we go. This is the real Morgan Race. Not the fake one.
Not the fake one.
This is full fat, not semi-skimmed.
Semi-skimmed.
Maybe those weren't the words used to describe. You're none of that sugar water. You're
very Freudian of you.
Yes, indeed. Oh my God, here he is.
Yes, there he is.
The real McRace.
Yes, here I am. Rock me like a hurricane.
Yes.
Or Amadeus. The option's yours, really.
Amadeus?
Rock me Amadeus. I said rock me like a hurricane, but rock me Amadeus. Yeah.
Oh! Is that where it's like Amadeus?
Yes, yeah.
I never knew that at any point he said the words rock me.
The song's called Rock Me Amadeus. I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah. Of course, probably named after Wolfgang Mozart Amadeus. Or Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, obviously.
As opposed to Simon Rock Me Amadeus.
Yes, as opposed to... but we all know there. So, to tell us a little bit, I say as, of course, me and the viewers, not me, and Gerald over here.
Gerald.
A little bit about what you do.
Well, I make currently slightly below average films.
Fantastic.
And things along those lines. Everything in the broadcast sort of spectrum. So, film, TV, radio, that's my sort of jam.
The multimedia, broadcast media, because that's one of the course that you're studying is broadcast media.
Broadcast media, yes. Broadcast media, with a course that I was studying until a minor global pandemic strucketh upon us.
Yes.
It's
heard that, but yeah.
Yeah, it's the course that I'm currently deferred from studying, but will eventually finish at some point.
Resume, and then, I mean, obviously, because as we know, to conduct things like interviews, which you've actually dabbled in interviewing before, I'm pretty sure you got an interview featured on BBC Tees.
Yes, I did. Funny enough, on the day, there's a lot made of that. On the day, I wasn't the one being interviewed or the interviewer. I was the person holding a jacket next to the boom mic to stop, not the boom mic, the shotgun mic to stop the wind getting into it, to moderate success. So I did all the background stuff. To be fair, I got the interviewer and stuff like that. Yep. But I didn't do any of the interviewing. But I have done interviews before. You know, just part and parcel of being a media guy. You know, media savvy.
Indeed, as it were, much more down with technology than myself. You've got all the what you call it, ground control.
The headphones. The newfangled headphones that all the kids are wearing nowadays.
Yeah, Um, yes, indeed. In terms of like recording, um, recording your interviews, obviously you said that you use well, that the sort of stuff that you'd worked with was proper.
The proper stuff, like
Yeah,
proper
yeah.
full-on cameras, shotgun mics, all the little lapel mics and all that stuff. The professional, what do we call them? It's actually quite cheap pieces of kit. Actually, a lot of the things you can do now, it's sort of quite a lot more accessible. Really, you could probably do. Obviously, I say a lot more accessible, more accessible than it was. All you need really to do a half decent interview is a little lapel mic, which you can get for tens of pounds, and then a decent camera, which will set you back a couple of hundred. But it's it's certainly easier than it used to be. So the professional sort of standard that the BBC would like, for example, is much easier to get to nowadays. But it's always nice to have the BBCT's tag on it, just to say that it's professionally done.
Of course, certified. Thank you as well for digging out of that an actual question, because I was quite lost on how to ask and how to get down to basically, how easy is it to achieve that sort of professional finish. But yes, answered very nicely there. So in terms of when it comes to adding music, because you do sort of little film projects, like, did you recently do a Star Wars one, or is that one that's...
Well, it's in the process of being made at the moment. We're only at the writing process at the moment.
Yeah.
So me and a friend of mine are writing the script. So we're doing choreography for fight scenes, getting that all scripted out. We've done, I'd say, maybe 40%, 50% of the script. Then it'll be down to all the pre-production mind maps, shot lists, and all that stuff. Then getting it filmed. So it's in the early stages, but hopefully at some point this year it'll get done.
Yes. So where does music and sort of scoring, when it comes along with the scenes, I mean, obviously the original Star Wars, fantastic soundtrack by
absolutely
Williams. Where does that sort of fit in with you? Like, is it mainly you that sifts through the sort of sounds and the sort of songs and scores that you'd want to fit each scene, or is that left to another member of the team? Or
I think it can depend. Obviously, if you've got like massive crews, then oftentimes you'll have like a writing sort of department. Then you have the people that shoot the film itself. But because it's quite a small set, we're writing and filming, and it's all part of the same people are doing the same things, which I often find is quite a lot easier, because it means that you'll see it a lot now. A lot more directors are writing their own films as well, which makes it so much easier when you're writing something and you have something in mind. You have a specific song, or you have a specific sort of mood that you want to get across. You can then write the scene to that without even necessarily having to listen to a song. Obviously, if you're using like an orchestral soundtrack, that won't get put on until like the end of the film, where you'll get a proper composer in to have a look at the scene, have a look at the way it's sort of mapped out. Then have a discussion about sort of what you want to achieve from the soundtrack itself. But at the very least, having that the seed there that you want to write something along those lines it's just so much better. And it can also vary. Like I said, with the orchestral soundtrack, where that can be put on after. If you're using like a pop soundtrack, or you're using like songs like Edgar Wright does it, Scorsese's done it, Tarantino's done it. If you've got an actual song that you can use, you could have that on in the background and map out the beats of the scene. So you can have like, I don't know, Punch's time up with the music and things like that. Edgar Wright's probably one of the best at it, if I'm honest. Oh, he's just so good. It's unbelievable.
Just the way that the soundtrack syncs up with the action and the way that they use it to drive it forwards. It's
absolutely.
It's like nothing else.
And that's it. And it can be something that helps you write a scene if you're struggling to sort of... If you put a song on, you can sort of imagine what's going to happen just by what's going on and with the music. The only struggle with that is then getting the rights to using the music, which for smaller sort of films can be a lot harder. With the bigger films, maybe less so. But it's sort of like weighing up what you want. So obviously, certain films will suit an orchestral soundtrack more. So Star Wars, for example, that Star Wars film that we're using, we're probably going to get orchestral soundtrack. You're not going to get like a rock song playing over Star Wars duels or whatever, although it'd be an interesting experiment, I suppose. Maybe not one that I'm willing to not an experiment I'm willing to embark on, I have to say. But
stake your reputation on that to be your accidental breakout in Star Wars or rock opera or something.
It either worked very well or it ruined you completely.
Yeah, it's kind of like with the movie Drive. Radio 1 did a rescore of that, and it's kind of like Marmite because originally it was all 80s synth sorts of tracks, which set the mood really well because it was all sort of like dark and a bit neon. But the rescoring is very much like Marmite. They put sort of more rock songs over it. But yeah, it would be interesting to see more movies rescored, I guess.
It is quite an interesting thing as well because obviously, like I was saying, you use music to sort of judge the mood of a scene.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things on the internet now where you can sort of look up like horror films where somebody's put like maybe not necessarily the music, but they've put sort of like comedic sort of elements in there, maybe like sound effects or like Benny Hill themes of like a ghost chasing down a hallway and stuff, and it can completely change the mood of the scene. No longer is that a sort of sinister, although the things that are happening on screen are sort of meant to be scary, or it's a horror film in general, so the mood sort of they're supposed to be sort of set in this sort of sinister tone. You can change it up with the music, and it can just change it like that. It can all of a sudden be a comedy or something else. So music just play a massive part, and rescoring it is something that's very, very. It tends to happen quite a lot during the pre-production. So obviously, you'll go through. If you've got a song in mind, you could be listening to that song and be set on that song, and then hear something else and go, actually, that might fit better. So it does happen. Obviously, not sort of years after the film's been re-released or anything like that, but it is quite an interesting thing. It's just hilarious how sort of a bigger part music plays and things. Considering a lot of people, when a scene's being played out, you probably don't notice the music or you're not thinking about the music in the moment. But if you took the music away, you'd instantly know it wouldn't feel right. It wouldn't sit right with you. And knowing when to score things and when not to score things can be a big part to play in that as well. But yeah, the music adds so much, and it can just completely. It's a make or break the music.
Yeah. What do you think of some of your like top film soundtracks?
Oh, I'd have to say number one's probably Star Wars. I mean, that's a number one for most people. John Williams is just excellent. I'd probably put John Williams' soundtracks up there in general, so like Star Wars, Indiana Jones, that sort of thing. Another one, Pirates of the Caribbean, is just absolutely fantastic. It's just awesome. Davy Jones's theme is just ridiculous, like so cool, and the organs and stuff like that. And it's sort of like excellent soundtrack. Most of the other ones will be sort of like the pop soundtracks, like we mentioned before, Baby Driver, and Hot Fuzz, Edgar Wright films, because not only do those songs work well with the scene, but they're also just really good songs. So you could probably have like Guardians of the Galaxy soundtracks, things like that, just collections of really good music. But yeah, that's sort of where I'd go down the line. So I don't have like a set list, but definitely sort of Star Wars and Pirates of the Caribbean have to be on there somewhere.
Yeah, definitely. Going back to a point you made earlier about how smaller films usually can't really afford to do soundtracks as such, like buy-in pop songs. They'd usually have to do their own sort of scores or leave music mostly out of it unless it was really needed to build attention. I suppose sometimes if you only have that tiny bit of scoring and it could actually amplify when it is used. But there's that fact about Reservoir Dogs that I think you mentioned earlier about Tarantino, where most of the budget of that movie was actually for the song Stuck in the Middle with You.
Yeah, it was it was, I can't remember, it was some ridiculous percentage of the budget that was used on just getting the rights to that song. But even then, Reservoir Dogs for his sort of like first big film had still quite a big budget. It was up in the like few millions at least, and that was really like budgeting secured from like Harvey Keitel being on board and getting people in. It sort of built up around that. So it was a fairly big film for.
It's a debut.
It's a debut film, but films are expensive to make, so it really is sort of weighing up the cost. You've got to weigh up. Obviously, that song in Quentin Tarantino's mind, at least, added to that. That was the sort of pivotal thing to do with that scene. A lot of the music in that, it sort of sets the. It sort of adds a bit of a juxtaposition in that scene, obviously, and it sort of tells the story of that scene stuck in the middle of you, but also sort of just gives it a bit of a background sort of vibe to it. You understand at what point in time you are,
Yeah,
if you know what I mean, just by the music on the radio, and you've got like the radio announcer or the radio DJ talking at certain points, like the radio stations that you're listening to. So it sort of gives a character to the film itself. With smaller films, you've got to really weigh up: is having that one song in that film going to be the make or break moment? Like, could you just sit on GarageBand and just sort of make a little soundtrack just to sort of add something to it, or do you need something like that? Do you need this actual song? So oftentimes that can dictate what you're writing to as well. So if you can't get that actual song, if you get something like it and just play something over, then maybe you have to add more to the scene itself because the music can't sort of carry it as much. So it's one of those things that you've got to weigh up.
Yeah. The way you're saying that you might actually have to add more story, like, or maybe more dialogue in the scene, more going on if it's just a score as opposed to the soundtrack, because obviously sometimes the lyrics to a song can actually be explaining what's going on,
and it can be used as like a narrative device. If you have to sort of, with soundtracks, it's often better to write thinking that your music is going to be accompanying that as a background bit, just to sort of tie up things, as opposed to being like a narrative element, until you get to the point where you think that it's absolutely necessary.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think with things like Baby Driver, I mean, they get all of the rights to those songs on the soundtrack. One good thing about that soundtrack was it introduced a lot of people to different sort of bands and different styles of music. Like, I hadn't heard Bell Bottoms before, but absolutely fantastic song. I immediately went out and bought the soundtrack, and then everyone who has that soundtrack probably drives around thinking that they're thinking that they're Baby Driver. But where was I going to go with that point?
He's off on one.
I've gone on a tangent. Just got to retrace my steps. Find what path I was going to go down.
So this is you introducing people to different styles of music?
Yep, I think it was mainly about how the music there is a big sort of narrative point, and that really does help to tell the story.
I was going to say, because it's sort of a pivotal thing. The baby and what's the last name? Deborah.
Yeah, Deborah.
They sort of bond over sort of the music that they play and things like that. And obviously, baby's mum was a musician or whatever, and they sort of listen to that. And at the end, he gets the one tape and sort of bond over that. So it's like not only does it serve to fill in the background noise of the scene, it also works in the narrative, but it also works in within the realms of the story itself. So it's sort of like a fourth wall breaking thing, where you've got the characters in the film talking about the music that's playing. I suppose, obviously, I can't remember what type of sound it is. There's two types of sound in film. Essentially, you've got the sounds that the characters can hear, and you've got the sounds that only the audience can hear. And obviously, when it sort of crosses over, there's like a special name for it. And if I was perhaps still studying, I might be able to tell it to you. But that's just one you're going to have to. I'll have to put it in the comments later on. But yeah, there's and it can be very, very useful to have the characters on the screen talking about it, because then you've got the song in mind, the song is playing, and it sort of carries the narrative forward. It's quite good. I do like just Edgar Wright. He's just fantastic.
Yeah, fantastic director. Obviously, the Cornetto's trilogy, a big part of his repertoire. When I think back to those movies, like Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz, you can't really think of their soundtracks. You can't really think of. You couldn't describe, well, or at least I couldn't describe how a song in those movies would go, which is quite interesting. That Edgar obviously moved from doing something that was very minimalist, in the way that it was scored and the way that the soundtrack was, to a project like Baby Driver? Are there any other sorts of songs like not songs, any other sort of movies that he's done that you know of that are quite soundtrack heavy, or was that a new sort of direction change?
I don't know if it was new direction change. I think it was certainly something that he wanted to do, because you can see that he's got a big love of music, and when he does get the chance, he will put a specific song in there. And with Hot Fuzz as well, a lot of the transitions have got a soundtrack over it. So it's like they'll be getting the police car and they'll have the shots of like boom, seatbelt on, whatever they're doing, hands on wheel, things like that, and it'll have a sort of song in the background, whether or not you can hear it or not. But it adds a sort of rhythm to the scene. You can tell that the actions are in line with what's going on with the music. I think it was really just about opportunity, and it's just nice to see people sort of have fun with direction that can sort of take it. It's painfully obvious when a director isn't having fun with the movie that they're working on, or it's like they've been brought in to do it. It's just sort of not sort of gelling with them. With Edgar Wright, it's clear that he sort of enjoys everything that he works on, and he has fun with it. And I think that the music that he selects is a big part of that. Obviously, he's a big music fan. He's a big Queen fan, which I share. You've had to sort of you were sort of on the fence, I remember, but since and Simon and Garfunkel as well. But you know, you've been brought over to the light side now of appreciating those fantastic artists.
Yeah, I'll say Edgar Wright did play a big part in that with the more sort of, well, not rocky side of Simon and Garfunkel, but obviously the songs that everyone hears first. Yeah, that's that sort of side of it. The more, upbeat stuff instead of the stuff that you usually hear, which is obviously Bridge Over Troubled Waters and Sounds of Silence,
things like that. Yeah, but that's something that films can offer. You know, if you've got, you might not particularly like a song, but seeing it on a film or associating that with a specific thing that happens, or with something that happens on screen, can just give you a sort of a different appreciation for that song. So it's quite interesting how that can sort of work. How you might not like the sound of something, but when you've got an image to go along with it, then all of a sudden it brings new meaning to you, maybe, or you can just enjoy that song in the context of that film or whatever it happens to be. But I'm just glad that Edgar Wright's got you to like Queen and Simon Garfunkel.
Yes,
it's always nice.
Of course, it's always good. Have that world properly opened up to you. Yeah. When it comes to writing stuff yourself, which I know you've written a few like storyboards and sort of ideas for films, how much does sort of listening to music influence what you'll be writing or what you'll be writing about? Like, do you ever get ideas from song lyrics or a particular mood of a song?
Yes.
What seen about?
Quite often, to be fair, you could be like listening to a song and you'll just sort of start thinking about things, or maybe you'll a certain song will remind you of something, and you can sort of write an idea around that. So it could literally be one song and you've got an entire script around it just because you wanted to use that one song in a particular scene, or you wanted to sort of recreate the mood of that song. So it's definitely something that sort of goes hand in hand. I couldn't write, I couldn't think of an idea or write an idea down or write a script without sort of having some sort of music that I'm very least thinking of. So even if it's not, even if the music's got nothing to do with, or won't be part of the soundtrack, or isn't really anything to do with the film, having sort of a mood that you want to sort of replicate from that song, maybe just to sort of guide you along with it, and it's a massive help. I couldn't just sit down and just think of something off the top of my head. It's like you've got to have a sort of inspiration from somewhere, and I think music is a really good one for it.
Yeah, definitely. So what sorts of stuff, I mean, just off the top of your head, have you been listening to recently, if you've been doing any writing?
Oh, Arctic Monkeys, actually.
Yeah.
For writing, not the early stuff. I think that's quite a difficult thing to be able to write to. It's a lot of poppy, grungy, punky, indie sound. Mainly their AM album is really sort of, which is a divisive album, I know, but it's got a special place in my heart. It was the first Arctic Monkeys album that I sort of properly listened to, and it's still my favourite. I've got it on vinyl actually.
Yeah, I think definitely for
Don't know
people,
where my vinyl box is.
that was almost our first taste of it, because obviously the song "Do I Want to Know" got incredibly big around the time that we were young teens. Everyone was listening to that sort of stuff. Obviously, me with my guitar was one of the first riffs I wanted to learn. But obviously, as we've matured, we see that there's a lot more to the Arctic Monkeys than just that. What did you think of their last album? Not the I think they've released an Albert Hall one recently, but the one before that, Tranquility Base and
Hotel and Casino.
Hotel and Casino.
I liked it, which is not the most convincing way I could have said that sentence, but it's true. I think for that one, it took a few listens. I think it's one of those albums that I pick a few songs off, and they're the songs I listen to. Some of them, just not really a fan, but when you're in a certain mood, it can really sort of get it. I quite liked the sort of. It was a completely different direction, obviously, but they were sort of maybe building up to it. I think with AM, it sort of like had a few little clues in there that were going to go off in a separate direction to it. But you know, they've got. I think it's a decent album. I don't think it's the best, but
no, it's definitely it's got that sort of more cool, laid back vibe to it, but a different sort of cool to what it was before. It's almost more like self-assured, and I can imagine that a few of the songs there would be quite good to write particular scenes to.
Definitely. There was actually an idea that I had about Golden Trunks. Well, I was. There was. It's actually quite an interesting story. So I did drama in secondary school, and obviously we had to do sort of final performances for that. And it wasn't my final performance because I hated it, but it was a different group's final performance that I wanted to sort of maybe rewrite. And it was actually Golden Trunks, the song, which was sort of quite an interesting song, sort of talking a bit about, I guess, Donald Trump is the meaning that I'm sort of assigning to it. But I quite want to rework that sort of final drum piece with that song and just sort of see what sort of come out of it, which was an interesting idea. I might have to try and actually get some words down on it, but it was quite interesting. It's just one of those things, like, again, like I'm saying, like music can sort of bring ideas up that you had ages ago, or just remind you of things, and it can just spawn an idea off it. But good album, better than people thought it was, I think.
Yeah, it wasn't quite received as well by the older fans who had obviously heard that more, obviously grungier sort of feel to it.
There's one thing I will say is that you can absolutely imagine Alex Turner singing it live, especially now with like the sort of new look, the suits with the slick back hair and all that stuff, and his interesting stage antics. His sort of. I think it's a band. It's an album that sort of like marked their maturity, if you like. I think they've grown as people, or they've certainly developed different characters at least, and I think that one absolutely sort of nails it on the head as to what they were like at the time.
Yeah, you can tell that it's sort of the Wombats had a similar sort of change in direction as they got into their 30s. As you know, obviously starting in your teens, you're sort of getting into the more twilight years of your musical career. You can hear that more sure of itself sound almost, which is quite nice. Talking about the Wombats, they have quite a few interesting music videos. I don't know if you've seen many of them, but when you were talking about how you can take sort of different meanings from songs, so maybe a song like Greek Tragedy, that wasn't originally intended to be sort of ascribed to a stalkery vibe, but the music video basically tells the story of this stalker that hunts down the band members brutally murders them. So that kind of completely changes the vibe to the song, and I was wondering, when it comes to music videos, is that anything that you've ever thought of?
I have. I don't know if I'd be particularly good at music videos though. I think it's like that's a different type of filmmaking. And
Yeah,
obviously a lot of it now is less about well, it depends what genre you're going into, I suppose, but less of it now is sort of telling a story or a narrative to do with that song and more about sort of showing off the live dance routines that might be performed later
yeah,
on stage if you're talking about like pop music and things like that. Or just having like a crazy set and just having a singer sort of prance around singing with it. So I don't know. It would have to be the right sort of music, and there'd have to be a lot of communication between the band and the
yeah,
people doing it, just so you get the right sort of message across. Um, but yeah, it'd be an interesting thing to try out at least
yeah.
once. Give it a go.
Exactly. There's
Mm,
no harm in trying.
that's it.
But it's quite interesting when you were saying about how there'd have to be quite clear communication between what the band wants and what the director wants.
Mm,
Um, in the music video, I don't know if you've seen the music video to "Lemon to a Knife Fight" by by the Wombats, but that
yes.
is they. I was watching an interview with the Wombats that they said that they kind of just let the director have free reign over how he wanted to interpret the song, just as just out of interest what he sort of imagined.
Mm,
Um, and it just came out as something really cool and sort of gritty. Um, which I mean, you do kind of get that vibe from the song, but it's more intensified
mm,
by the video, and the visuals give the song almost an entirely different meaning. Um, which, of course, I mean, we talked about how music can give the visuals a different meaning. Sometimes the visuals can be the things giving the sound a different
mm.
meaning to you. Um, so have you ever had that where you've gone into a movie and you've watched something and you've heard a song that you've maybe listened to before, but you've heard it used in a context where you think, oh, and then you start to ascribe that sort of meaning to it.
It's an interesting one. It's quite a difficult thing to do.
Yeah,
I think obviously mainly because we were talking about how you use specific sounds to sort of give a mood to a scene. I think one maybe a good example of where you can find that happening um, on a more regular occurrence is in horror films. They'll often use songs that aren't sinister at all to make a scene more sinister. It's like a reverse
yeah,
psychology sort of thing. So often, like children's nursery rhymes, things like that, can be played over a horror scene to increase how scary it might appear
yeah,
or might feel. So it's quite an interesting thing you can do with music where assigning certain visuals, if you do it properly, you can sort of reverse the meaning of songs or give something a different meaning.
yeah,
Um, but I don't think I've ever had. I think in a music video sense, it would definitely work better as opposed to a film sense because then the music video is it's part of the song almost. If you
yeah.
get what I mean, it's
It
what
comes part
people
and parcel.
yeah, it's the whole thing, the whole bit of the cake, as it were,
Yes,
the two halves,
indeed.
and obviously that's the way that most people sort of consume music when it comes out. They'll sort of search up the music video, and
Yeah,
then forever that will be the meaning that they have with the song.
yeah,
It can be quite a difficult thing to break, but it would be quite interesting, I suppose, to I wouldn't say purposefully, but maybe sort of experiment with trying to get a different meaning out of music videos,
yeah,
um, or trying to make a give people a different interpretation. I think it is quite a brave thing as well to give a director sort of creative freedom over
yeah.
your music in case it's horribly interpreted or sort of goes off in a complete wrong direction. But I suppose then that's the artistic risk that you take, really.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes that does pay off, and
Other
obviously,
times it
other
might
times.
not.
Um, when you were talking about how that's usually the way that things are delivered now, um, obviously back in sort of the 80s and 90s with MTV, a
Mhm.
lot of people would tune into, I mean, specific channels to get their music videos.
Mhm.
But now with it being just on YouTube, pretty much, a lot of people are making music videos, like even lower budget indie musicians are making their own,
Mhm.
just sort of more intimate videos. So when it comes to when it comes to like budgeting, a smaller project like that. Oh no, I've forgotten what the question was.
Take time.
I'm going senile. It's the old age. when you get to my age. It's now, bloody hell.
Yeah. It's 3
months.
3 months until I'm your age.
Yeah, almost to the day. Oh, what was the
What was the fucking question? You don't see breakdowns like this on BBC, do you? What was the fucking question? I'm gone. It's happened.
The pills are wearing off.
Back into your cupboard now. Come on, you're short circuiting.
Come on, Gunther. But no, it's what I was going to ask. I started off the wording wrong, which is where I went, where I backed myself into a corner where I just could not escape. It was when it comes to having a particular soundtrack and introducing a particular song, like Tarantino introduced. I mean, we're going way back now, but when Tarantino introduced the song "Stuck in the Middle with You" to the film, when it comes to budgeting for getting your soundtrack, do you think that sometimes a director would think, well, if I have these particular artists introduced to the film, would that maybe bring in more revenue? Like if a film has a really good soundtrack, I guess what I'm trying to ask is when it comes to the risk reward ratio of like getting big artists to maybe make a song for a film and ascribe their name to it, how much do you think that comes into play, like having sort of, scored by whoever?
That's tough. I think if you, that's a tough one. I'd say for example, what was the Fast and Furious film, the one where Paul Walker died? Because there was
6 or 7,
whichever one it was, but there was a song made for that film.
Yes.
And that was like a massive song. Maybe not because the song was any good, which it wasn't.
Well, yeah.
Putting the hammer down there, but no, but because that song was released. I think it was released shortly before the film, so people knew what it was linked with. So I think that did bring people in because people obviously it was a big news story, but also that song. Maybe people wanted to see how that song was going to be used in the film, and what sort of imagery they'd use. But I think because people knew what that song was about in relation to Paul Walker's death, I think it would have to rely on very specific circumstances where people maybe have a clue as to what that song is for, what it means in relation to that film. I think if you were to just sort of have a song in a film that was written by an artist and expect that fans of the artist would go and see that film, I don't think that'd weigh up. I think that maybe the only film that would maybe work is in the Bond films. I think that because the theme song plays such a massive part, it's like a big thing with every Bond film that you give a new artist a chance to sort of have put their mark on it. And I think that I definitely think that Billie Eilish has probably brought a lot of her fans over, because I'm not one to judge, but I don't think, when I think of like the typical Billie Eilish fans, I don't think that they're the ones typically that would go out and search for James Bond films to watch.
No.
They're just, if you were to have like Venn diagrams, the overlap would be minuscule at least, or at most rather. So I think that in specific circumstances like that, where the song has an impact on the film, maybe it's like the big theme song, or people understand what it means in the context of that film, then maybe. But I wouldn't say that, I don't know, I don't think, for example, if you just released a film and there was a song shoved in there somewhere, or it was like played over the credits, and that
Yeah.
wouldn't bring anybody in.
No.
And the risk rewards that can be quite high. So I think that's probably why only the fairly established players go for it. If you release a Fast and Furious film with a specific song attached to it, you're going to make money either way because it's a Fast and Furious film. And as long as you don't spend literal billions, you're probably going to make a turnover at some point. And with Bond films, they're just a massive franchise, and those songs, the songs that sort of individual artists produce for that film, that it's part of. It's like a music video. You have the music video at the beginning of the film where the credits roll over and the theme song's played. So it's sort of part of the branding and identity of that film.
Yeah, they promote each other in a way.
Yeah, exactly that.
With Bond, it's definitely sort of, you can see that it would give either an up-and-coming artist or an artist that sort of needs a bit of a revival, or maybe just someone who's relevant at the time, like Billie Eilish is at the moment. Just give them something to ascribe their name to. I think the Bond franchise in general, you don't hear of it as much, sort of in passing, or at least I've not noticed it as much. Like, it always used to be the big thing, like, there's a new Bond movie coming out this year. So I think them bringing a fresh face like Billie Eilish, someone who's relevant at the time, you're very right in that it would probably bring along new fans who'd maybe not forayed into that sort of world before. So it is very much the movie promoting the artist in that sense, and the artist also promoting the movie with the song being released far before.
I think that's probably part of the risk reward. At the very least that somebody else is involved in that. It's not if it doesn't quite work, then it might have an impact on the song as well. So it's like a sort of, both the musician and the filmmakers are both taking that risk. Although I suppose it could go either way. I mean, whether or not one of them's taking a bigger risk or not, I don't really know. But I think that because there's those two sides taking risk there, if you've got enough sort of backing or you've got enough confidence for it to sort of go through, then it's probably going to work. You'd at least think so. I hope so.
Definitely. On the topic of Bond, do you have a sort of favourite Bond theme?
Yes, I do. My favourite Bond theme is Live and Let Die by Paul McCartney.
Very good. And what about
Wings? There he is. Wings, that's it. But yeah, I'd definitely say that's up there. And the theme to Casino Royale is another good one.
Yeah, Chris Corn.
Which film did Jack White and Alicia Keys do? Is that Quantum of Solace?
Yeah, Quantum of Solace.
Quantum of Solace.
And that theme is Another Way to Die.
Another Way to Die, that's it.
Yeah, Jack White and Alicia Keys.
Incidentally, I also like Skyfall. So that was a really good theme. And I also like Billie Eilish's theme, so I know that might be one that you disagree with, but I quite like Billie Eilish. So I'm just too hip and cool, Owen. Maybe when I'm 21, I'll start disliking Billie Eilish, but up until that point, you'll just have to deal with it. I always think I don't know, some Bond themes that's probably bring it back something to do with the films as well. If I'm not a massive fan of the films, I'm probably not going to like the song. A lot of my favourite Bond films are also my favourite sort of soundtracks as well. Yeah. So, although I don't like Quantum of Solace, actually, that was a lie, but I do like the song. But like I said, Skyfall, Live and Let Die, and things like that.
Yeah,
I like them, and I like the soundtracks as well. So maybe there's something sort of hand in there. What about you? What's your favourites?
I have to say, it's because of the way that the soundtrack for Casino Royale, the theme song was so different to what had been done before. Like, they hadn't gone in a purely rock direction. Like, they'd maybe had like 80s style sort of rock, that sort of soft rock, but they hadn't gone in a full more modern direction and made it a more sort of aggressive sort of sound. And I think that really set up Daniel Craig's Bond very well. So I think the fact that that theme went in that direction actually prepared a lot of people going in cinemas, sort of being used to the sort of more, I don't want to say, whimsical, like sort of unrealistic Bonds where, you'll like put an expanding pill inside the villain and he'll inflate and then explode the building inside. They sort of went from that, where he's picking up Blofeld in a helicopter, down a chimney, and they went more towards the real side of espionage, and so made it
a bit more grounded in reality.
Yeah, and a bit more gritty. And I think that song really did set you up for the change that was going to be there. This is the modern sort of Bond. He's a bit more, aggressive, and it's not as many, not as many quips.
No, I still think Roger Moore is the best Bond. But, you're inclined to think that Daniel Craig.
No. I don't think he's the best Bond, but I'd say that those were the movies that I enjoy the most. Like if I'm watching if I want a spy movie, I'll watch like Daniel Craig's Bond movies or or the Bourne, like the Bourne trilogy. But although it's not a trilogy anymore, I think it's a quadrilogy. But yes, anyway. But if I wanted a Bond movie, obviously you've got Roger Moore, and Sean Connery is misogynistic as he was.
If you're willing to sort of wince every few minutes when he says something that's woefully not all right, or when he slaps somebody, just horrific things. But he was a product of its time, I suppose.
Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, I think the music can also play a part in developing the character as well. Like you said, sort of like just sort of slight direction change, sort of preparing you for a slightly grittier James Bond. And I think that the difference between, I think that maybe you saw it with Pierce Brosnan, they were trying to go in that direction, and then Daniel Craig sort of came in and sort of continued it, and I think made it a lot better. I didn't quite like Pierce Brosnan's Bonds, but music was still okay. But
I was going to say that's like unlocked the sort of memory in my mind that Pierce Brosnan was James Bond. That's the whole sort of 90s era of Bond was very, because techno was coming more and more into vogue at that time.
Yeah.
And it went a lot more sort of like, there was a lot more of that sort of stuff peppered throughout the soundtrack. And it was also more towards the technology side of things. Like his gadgets got more and more ridiculous, like an invisible car and that sort of thing. And they definitely sort of kept going up and up and up and up. And it's sort of like how far they could push the envelope before then realizing that it was just becoming a bit Austin Powers.
I think it was they went a bit millennium crazy. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2000 went. Oh, it's the future now. Let's just.
Yeah,
go for it. It's also quite interesting, maybe, how the sort of music culture at the time can influence the content of the films. Like, I can't imagine they couldn't have stayed with a sort of Roger Moore-esque type James Bond with the music of the time. And in the same way, you couldn't have had a Pierce Brosnan and Daniel Craig James Bond with the music that they used to use. They have to sort of evolve sort of together in that way, and it's probably why we're seeing a return of a lot of maybe not a return, but a lot of TV now is quite sort of dark and gritty and sort of gritty, punchy men in all the colour grading's grey and things like that, and the music goes along with it because we sort of have where in the sort of early 2000s you had a big pop boom techno-y. It was all
boppy,
high tempo, jazzy stuff, and now we've got a sort of slower. The way that indie music sort of progressed. Obviously, you've got two sides. I'm sure there's plenty of sort of bands that are still doing sort of songs that are reminiscent of sort of that 2000s late 90s, early 2000s pop genre. But sort of the way that the music landscape's changed has also allowed your films and your TV to sort of hop in that same direction, or at the very least, it's easier for those things to be made because that sort of music is already, we're sort of used to hearing it by now. So it's quite interesting how it sort of influences, or how different sort of media forms can influence each other.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to say this. Do you think that sort of the mood, it sounds quite all-encompassing, but the mood of the world at the time can kind of influence the sort of media that's being brought out? Obviously, films are oftentimes big reflections on society or on a particular sort of part of society, which songs also often are. Like, you write a song about a particular situation or something that's going on, and maybe that's why they mesh together so well at the time. Do you think that there's sort of anything in particular that's going on? What's your take and how that's shaping the landscape of media? I don't know, it's a big question, but
it's okay. I can handle it. I think obviously you're absolutely right. Obviously, people will write things, whether it's films or music or books or whatever it happens to be. They'll make things about how they feel or what they see in the world. So you'll see that with music. You'll have now, when artists are sort of able to record again or release albums, you'll have a wave of sort of like lockdown albums that sort of have this mood about what people are doing with the time, sort of like isolation, sort of quite dark, potentially quite sad albums, but maybe quite happy albums, quite uplifting albums, people trying to sort of like see the bright side of things. And again, you will also have a wave of a million zombie films about the COVID outbreak and what the reflections that has on society. And some of them will be very good and some of them will be awful cash-ins, and I just can't wait for that. But yeah, it's massive. It's like you'll see if you look back and see what jumping back to Bond, you'll see the reflection of how society sort of thought of things, because the enemy, obviously Bond, I'm using Bond as an example, but you'll see sort of from like the 1950s and 60s, the enemy in films was always like a Germanic sort of Middle European, Prussian sort of psychopath. Chitty Chitty Bang Bang's fantastic for that. Sort of like 60s, the very racially sensitive German characters in that, and the definitely not Hitler caricatures that were in this famous children's film. To sort of see that switch over in like the 60s, 70s, 80s, to all of a sudden it was now the Russians, the very sensitively done Russian caricatures of these sort of massive burly guys in cargo trousers and black jumpers who were all bald and with big moustaches, stealing people from
nukes and that sort of thing.
Nukes and all that sort of thing, and then again we see it with potentially sort of like Middle Eastern caricatures, and because they're the enemies sort of like reflect what's going on in society now, and obviously that's only limited to sort of like the action genre. But it's an example of where sort of society's sort of main concerns are, where we see threats. You'll probably see a lot of like environmental films as well, because we see that as a threat. Certainly more sort of environmentally conscious pieces of media than you saw maybe even 20 years ago, when it was sort of like just coming to our attention. Absolutely, sort of like the way society sees things, and I hate to talk about society as if it's this one mechanism that everybody's sort of a hive mind. Yes, society. I hate talking about society like that, but we live in one, so
we do.
We do live in a society. But absolutely, media does reflect society, and it's obvious when you look at it.
Yeah. Do you think that the particular producer of a certain type of media, do you think that? I mean, obviously, a lot of times it will be biased, but how much do you think, through the lens of personal experience, how much do you think that actually skews the perception of what's going on at the time? Because, like you say, a lot of media around the time, like of the Cold War, would basically tell people, oh, Russians are the enemy. And a lot of media, like action films around the time of like the Iraq War and Afghanistan, when that was going on, they'd be saying, oh, Middle Easterns, they're the enemy. And it's so how much do you think that a director's personal source of biases and feelings would come into a film?
I definitely think that they'll have a sway on the perspective that the film's written from. So depending on which side you want to win, you could look at the winners in the winners in a film storyline, and you can quickly work out what the directors or the writers' feelings towards the enemies were, even if it's like, even if these are sort of metaphors. Even if the characters are metaphors for certain things going on, they could be, they could use traits from specific sort of groups of people, but they might not be an actual representation of them. And yet you can still sort of piece together what people's thoughts are, or what the director's thoughts are on that. So I absolutely think that their sort of biases come through. However much you might try to avoid it, it can be quite blatant. But in a more general sense, I think that directors will try to match the mood that people, that the broader population will sort of feel. You're not going to see a film very often that sort of depicts the
society's like view.
Potentially, I mean, it would be quite subversive, I think, for a director to show biases that went against the general perception of what people think. But I suppose that could create quite an interesting perspective. But I absolutely, definitely think that the director's biases will sort of shape the way that they tell a story.
Yeah. Do you think that a lot of directors would use a movie to challenge almost a sort of group mentality, like Fight Club, fantastic example of the director challenging the toxic masculinity that was going on at the time, and like consumerism.
I was just going to jump on that because although that is definitely what the director's intent was, and obviously the book that it was based on, it was the purpose was to challenge these sort of toxic masculine ideals, and yet ironically it's become a sort of symbol of that mindset. You'll have like frat bros talking about their favourite film being Fight Club and not aware that it's a satire satirising their sort of behaviour on it.
Yeah.
And it can be quite sort of annoying in that way to see. Obviously, if a film is misinterpreted or you've got a different interpretation to it, that's fine. But when it literally gets flipped on its head to now meaning like the satire sort of goes unnoticed or the criticism goes unnoticed and is now hailed by these people as a sort of representation of their worldview. You see it also with The Matrix is a good example. The whole sort of take the red pill. A red pill now is a code word for sort of this enlightened conservative. Well, it depends on your perspective, but generally on the internet, online, it means this sort of conservative. If you take the red pill, you're sort of enlightened to sort of conservative ideals. When the directors of The Matrix are liberal trans women who are like on the opposite ends of the spectrum to what that would mean. So it's quite interesting to see how not only can the director's biases try like shape the film itself and how a certain meaning will be woven into the structure and the narrative, but also how people can flip that and interpret it in their own way and then have it sort of backfire horrifically. So now every clown on the internet talking about red pilling people, not knowing that it doesn't mean what they say it does, and that's quite annoying. And I hate talking about films as if it's like this is what it means, but occasionally films do mean what they mean for a reason, and people are just wrong. That's what I think. Yeah. What was the question? I just had a wave of anger come over me. I can't even remember what the question was.
Basically, that question was, do you think that like it's the job of the director to try to sort of
that's it, yeah,
to a particular culture, like if there's something wrong going on in society, because obviously there's a very good quote that I quite like, which is art is meant to disturb the comfortable and comfort the disturbed. I think we saw that a lot in Joker, where it's, I mean, obviously he literally uses the sort of cliche of, society. In it.
Well, that's another interesting one actually, because that again depends on what your sort of political worldview is. You could either you could see Joker through the lens of a sort of like Trump supporting conservative, and see that as a sort of rise up against the sort of established Democrat world order sort of things, and you can sort of see that at the riots in America, the storming of the Capitol sort of building. You could see the Joker through that sort of lens and see that as a sort of like a sort of weird coup sort of thing against establishment Democrats. Or you could see that from a Marxist perspective, where you've got, which is the way that I see it. So you've got this sort of declining capitalist city where the majority of people are living in poverty, rising up against the ruling class and trying to take action for themselves. But again, that's all sort of, they've got two different ends of the spectrum. And however the director might have intended that to come across, the narrative and the scenes that we used, you could apply two different perspectives from it.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think that it's sort of wise for a director to leave things open more to interpretation, or do you think I've just had this? I was about to say, do you think that it should be more sort of handheld and you're shown more directly what their thoughts are, what their politics are? But I was just reminded of Blade Runner, obviously not the director's cut, but the original Blade Runner, where
Harrison Ford's voiceover.
Yeah, and
where you're shown something in a scene, and then you'll have Harrison Ford to explain it to you very, very nicely.
Exactly. So
I think that I think it's the job of the director to tell the story that they want to tell. Yeah. And then it's up to the audience to decide how they interpret that story. I think if you try to push a political message too blatantly, then it's just going to wind people up. Even people who might agree with that message, because it's just like it's so blatant. Because then you can't. It strips away enjoyment of the film. Because if you're being told, if it's clear that the director's got something in mind and they are telling you this is what it is, it means that your interpretation, you can't even form your interpretation on it. So I think it's better, absolutely, to leave the audience to sort of their own devices when it comes to that. Whether or not they get what you were going for, it's worth having more perspectives on a film than limiting it down sort of to one perspective. It's abstract art. If you have an artist spraying paint on a canvas, that means something to them. It could mean something, a million different things to a million different people. And I think it's better to leave it open to people to decide what they want to. I think it's more valuable to let people formulate their own opinions on films, music, art, whatever it might be, than it is to try to funnel people down to a particular path, because then it's not right. It's not what art's about, really.
Yeah, definitely. I would agree with that. And with that being said, we have been recording for over an hour now.
I was taking a quick look every now and again just at how long we were going. We haven't got a decent convo out of that, haven't we?
So that's fantastic. I might actually have a go at editing this video down a little bit. Take out
Just cut out some of the pauses and whatnot.
cut out some of the brain farts. But I mean, I guess that's what happens when I try to do it too impromptu. But no, definitely some incredibly good explanations and answers there. So thank you very much for your insight and for your time today.
That's all right. Anytime.
Yes. Well, I'll have you back on at some point, probably when that project is finished.
At some point in the next 50 years.
Yes.
I'll be looking forward to it.
Sometime in the future in a galaxy far, far away.
Well, hey, there you go.
See, I'm down with the kids. I'm hip to it. Hip to those films that were released way before I was born. But
nearly 50 years ago.
Nearly 50.
1977 was the first Star Wars film.
How old's Ewan McGregor then? Sorry, that's completely off.
Those Star Wars films came out in like 1999, I think.
Yeah, because I was going to say that those were the prequels.
The prequels, not the first ones.
Yeah, I just had in my mind that they were because they were Yeah, anyway. I'm rambling.
We've been doing that for the past hour and a quarter.
Yeah, past hour and so, thank you very much again for your time, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye for now, guys.
In a bit.
Right. Maybe stop recording.